develop policies, the right ways to develop regulations, and we've had some references to corporate academic medical collaborations when we're trying to do these things. And I really resonated with the idea that every scientist needs to be an ethicist, but I don't necessarily resonate with every CEO being an ethicist, because there's all sorts of conflicts of interest that exist in a corporate environment that don't exist in an academic environment. And I'm thinking about the introspection into minimal cognitive states and how policy around that could, productively evolve. As someone on the more basic research side of cognitive neuroscience, I know that our ability to predict things from the brain is very, you can get statistical reliability, but on a case-by-case, trial-by-trial basis, you're not extraordinarily accurate. And consent is something that needs to be continuously reaffirmed. So if you get a, yes, I'm okay with this treatment at some point in time with somebody through MRI that's minimally conscious, that puts us in a very awkward ethical situation. They've said yes, but will they say yes in 5 minutes? And can they withdraw their consent? And I don't want a policy that says don't introspect and don't try to hear from this minimally conscious person. But as soon as you start listening, you enter into these other complicated scenarios. And the way that we would want to regulate that differs a lot from the way we want to regulate a research lab versus the way we want to regulate a corporation. So I wrote this down because I tried to make it a concise question, but that's kind of a core dump of all my thoughts here.
So I agree, consent needs to be maintained over time, and there are also criteria for what's called decision-making capacity. And people, and they're varying degrees. There's assent, right, that you're just agreeing, you understand the question, but you don't understand the risk benefits and alternatives in a rich way. So you're agreeing, and then there's consent, where you understand the implications. And there's also this sliding scale of competence or capacity, where the amount of evidencing of understanding you have to manifest as a patient or a subject in a trial relates to the gravity of the choice that's being presented, right? So if you're agreeing to a blood test, it's okay. The doctor comes in, okay. If it's a HIV test, same stick, but different kinds of consequences, you have to evidence a different kind of understanding. So that's important. There's also the role for surrogate decision makers, right? When you can't decide, others can decide for you. So that's pretty well, sorted out in the clinical space and in research context as well. I don't know if that answers your question. There were lots of points there. Is there anything else you wanted to get to? Because there was a first half of your question that.
Yeah, right. I think that gets to it, except that, if you have a noisy yes, no, I consent, I disconsent, and you have somebody there that could be making decisions for somebody, their medical power of attorney, when does the MRI readout overrule power?
Right. So the question was, when, how do you know you've reached that threshold? So when the Martin Monti paper came out in the New England Journal of Medicine, that was the yes-no paper with the volitional thing. I got interviewed by Ben Carey of the New York Times, and I ended up having the quote of the day, the little box, and I didn't even know about it. My friend said, you got quote of the day. It was like I'd won the Nobel Prize or something, quote of the day. And the quote was, it's sort of like a bad cell phone connection, and the bandwidth wasn't there. And I don't know about you, but when I'm talking to somebody on the cell phone, I put my earbuds in because I want to hear it. I want to drown out the rest of the noise, especially if I'm talking to my chairman or somebody. I want to know what he's saying or she's saying. So I think the issue is that yes, no is not enough, because they have to explain themselves, right? And they can't. And so that doesn't reach the threshold for representational decision making. On the other hand, if somebody is saying no, 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 and that has moral valence. But I think right now, and the first point of your comment, which I think is very important, is we're still at a point where we can't predict a lot. A lot of neuroethicists, colleagues of mine, are writing articles about, a three-headed cyborg goes into a bar, and they've used a kind of science fiction version of what the neuroscience is capable of doing. And what it does is it frightens people, and it delegitimates authentic conversation. So I think we have to, good facts lead to good ethics. When we make up the facts, or we get hyperbolic about what the science can do, we're not doing good ethics. So we have to be grounded in the real. And it's really hard for me to talk to a parent of a child who had a severe brain injury and try to prognosticate when in other parts of the academic literature we're about reading minds. We can't read minds, but people write about it as if we can. So part of your job is to keep the ethicists honest and call them on the the case vignettes that aren't real. And there's enough real to keep us occupied. We don't have to make stuff up.
Yeah. Sorry, one last question. I'm sorry.
Okay, we'll go real quick. I'm Megan Peters. I'm at UC Irvine, and apparently my question is the same as Thomas's, or very similar. So the question is very topical, relevant to policy and politics and governmental oversight, and it has to do with the announcement yesterday that now by 2026 or whatever it is, all data for all federally funded research must be shared. And I think data sharing is great, and I think most of the people here would agree with me. But in light of the fact that de-identification practices are woefully inadequate in the face of current computational power, what practical advice might you have for how we can go about exceeding the benchmark of defacing our MRIs and then removing the header from the nifty file and saying, oh great, it's de-identified, because it's not. What do we do? Can you help?
Yeah, so I think that maybe in this respect, maybe AI has to learn more from other communities, because we are not really used to consider AI as a human data technology or science. In fact, in our departments, even in universities, we don't have the usual human data review process that you are used to have. We don't, even though we use data maybe coming from human beings. So we are not used to that. So I would refer to you, and because what it means. But of course, we are used to data privacy, especially regulation and so on, and data sanitation and data anonymization. And so those processes maybe could be the ones that are useful in this respect. But again, I would be, interested in learning from the other community.
So just a couple things. This is an example where lots of different principles come into conflict with each other, and they don't necessarily all align in the same direction, right? So, and where does this all come from? It comes from a distrust, in a sense, right? You're not sharing data. If we share data, it's all good. We can do more things together. That's all good. But it also leads to questions of, has the data been curated? Are people going to understand it? And what about accountability? The analogy that I have that it's sort of been sort of a problem is recently the federal government said the medical record is accessible to patients, right? All that data. What's interesting is it's changed the medical record. People are not writing things in the medical record that they don't want patients or families to read that undermines communication with other practitioners and could undermine patient care. So I think it's an example where, focusing on one principle, you had that beautiful slide with all the different principles, they're all nested together. And if we hit one, it's like a whack-a-mole, and then we distort what we're doing. We're not necessarily ready for that because we can't de-identify, but no one's against transparency. Nobody's against data sharing in the abstract, but there's a lot of particular questions, and this is where we need to engage, as you've been doing and Google, with legislators, so they understand the unforeseen consequences of pushing on one thing in the other domains.
Super, thanks.
Okay, thanks. Joseph, thanks. Ooh, Sorry. Thanks, Francesca. Thank you all. Please keep the conversation going. Thanks.